Are we simply pushing people because now they can't afford a house because they're paying for this guy to have a house? Are we therefore pushing people down the property ladder, away from ownership, back into rentals, creating additional demand and spiraling our conflict? And it could get messy. It could get messy. Good morning, investors. Bradley here from Watson Estates, and you're listening to the largest, fastest growing podcast for Toronto real estate on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Love to keep you guys up to date with what's going on in the market. And today we're going to do just that as we dive deep into what cities in the GTA are going to outperform in 2022. That will make up a very small portion of our episode, though, as we start to dive into the affordability crisis here in Toronto and what every level of government, from city, provincial to federal, is doing to tackle those issues today. If you haven't already, please hit that like and subscribe to our show. We like to have some fun. As you can probably tell if you're watching us on video, I got quite a nice tan. I had set up a map for my wife, and I gave her a dart. I said, throw it, and wherever it lands, we will go on a trip. And we just got back. We didn't want to go behind the fridge, so instead we went to Great Wolf Lodge. Nice and relaxing, listening to hundreds of little kids running around screaming, but we're back and in action. And it was a bit of a work trip as well, because we were looking at some properties that we're doing due diligence out in the Niagara region. But excited to be back with you. As a broker and investor myself, I like to be informed with what's going on in our market. And that's precisely what we do here on our show. And in the meantime, I've also been slowly plugging away, putting together the modules for our 90-day landlord course, which is going to be launching very, very soon. I'm excited to share that with you guys. If you want the one-on-one coaching and you want to know how to be a managing partner, get outside that 9 to 5 and have massive passive income. That is the goal of that program, but we'll have more for you down the road. And if you want to just get on our investor list, we have that available down in the links below. But we're going to start off today talking about the market. We're going to do a bit of a market review, and then we're going to dive into, more specifically, this is going to be a very quick segment portion of our show, because the majority of it is going to get to what are the main issues in our city and what can we look to in 2022. You're going to start to see a lot of prediction videos happening into the market next year, and chances are good we'll probably have a few of our own. But it's hard to just say this is going to happen without the details. And today I want to load you up with details on where are the risks, because even if I don't think something will happen, there is a lot of outside forces, a lot of risks that are threatening our market that we need to be informed of. And that's precisely why we prefer long form and why we're having so much fun on our podcast. So let's get into the top performers, shall we? Starting with a Better Dwelling article, always a good time. A large Canadian real estate brokerage has forecast a rise up to 20%. That brokerage is RE/MAX. You've probably heard of them before. They're forecasting a 20% increase in our market over the next 12 months. When we hear the Toronto Real Estate Board, talking, moderate, 10%, I love it, 10% is moderate. We're hearing real estate brokerages that are a lot more aggressive in their expectations. Now, just to give you a little bit of historical context, over the last 2-3 years, RE/MAX typically has actually been the most accurate, the closest in line with their forecast. As aggressive as it sounds, might be a brokerage worth listening to, but time will tell, and time shows liars. But cities like Toronto are even forecast to see home prices more than they did with falling interest rates. So even though you might have experienced, in certain markets, you might have experienced 10, 20%, though we expect in a lot of ways interest rates to rise by mid-2022, they're saying in their predictions that the prices could go up even more. So when we look through 2021, the past 12 months, who is the winner? The best market you could have invested in was Barrie. Barrie, Ontario was the biggest gainer. Listen to this, a 53% gain over the past year. The brokerage is forecasting another average sale price increase this year of $88,500 this coming year through 2022, which is another 15% increase on top of the last year's record gain. How unbelievable is that? 50% increase, not that far from the city, semi-commutable, and a good place for people who are looking to run away, escape the city during a time like COVID, but still not done yet. $88,000 increase in price over the next 12 months. Not a bad return. Not to mention if it's your primary residence, tax-free, my friends. Real estate, a beautiful thing. We love it here. 2022 though, what's next? Where is your... Based on the predictions of RE/MAX, where is your best investment spent? They say it's actually in Muskoka, believe it or not. Although I sit here and I do tend to agree, we're going to see an influx of buyers running back into the city. Muskoka takes the lead on Remax prediction list. They say they were up this year 20%, pretty sweet, but they're expecting on top of that an additional 30% growth in Muskoka over 30% was last year. They're expecting 20% this year, which isn't, so again, 20% is like, ooh, that's the top that we're expecting. And many people would say, oh, that's kind of sad comparative to 30% last year. That's still aggressive, guys. We're talking a significant increase, which should take us, even in a normal sense, at least 5 years to see that kind of growth. And here we are looking at it in one. But the most expensive city that we're going to have at the end of 2022, according to Remax, it will remain Oakville, Ontario, which is expected to have an average price of just under 1.7 million, up 7.5% from this year. And it's on top of the 21% that it saw in 2021. Oakville, in some ways, actually had some pretty successful months. I remember seeing them near the top of the list and one of the noteworthy cities. But here they are again, going to maintain that top spot, 7.5% this year. Not to mention, there's a $300,000 price gap between them and second place going to York Region. Some of the other notable ones here, believe it or not, when we're coming from the top prices, not top growth, but top prices that are local to us, we see Oakville, York, Burlington, Brampton, then Toronto, Mississauga, Durham. There's your list in that order of what they expect will be the most expensive cities in 2022. So here's what they say. After underperforming this year, Toronto real estate is forecast by Remax to see even bigger gains next year. The average sale price expected to hit 1.16, which will be up 10% from this year. Very much in line with what Toronto Real Estate Board is saying. They're saying 9 to 10%. So here we go. Over the past year, the average price increased a measly 7%. Still good. Substantial, but when you compare it against 30% Muskoka, 20% Oakville, kind of lame though. What do you guys think of these predictions as we're kind of formulating my thoughts here? And I haven't released a formal predictions video. I think these are very much in line with what people expect, but I would love to hear from you in the comments, or if you're listening to us on audio, please send me a DM, tag me at Watson Estates, hit me up, folks. So ultimately, when it comes to affordability, as we transition here, the next generation, the Gen Z, see, millennials were supposed to be next generation, not anymore. Gen Z is screwed. They are screwed. A new report is claiming that more than half of the city's Generation Z residents have given up on the dream of ever owning a single family home. This comes from Sotheby's, International Realty Canada, and Muslo Group. They surveyed over 1,500 Canadians in Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, and Montreal. And looking at Toronto, 52% of the Toronto residents they surveyed pretty much agreed with this, that they're giving up on this dream. So when they break it down in Toronto, 82% of respondents who had never before purchased a home reported feeling worried, because some of them did actually own a home, which obviously would skew the numbers. But of those who didn't, they felt worried that they will not be able to secure a home. And 38% indicated they were very worried. And I'm over here also very worried I think the ones that aren't worried or very worried are the ones that just don't understand the gravity of the situation. But they have no choice but to turn to condos. So for people who are sitting back and saying, is condos a worthwhile investment? For many Canadians in the next 5 to 10 years, it will be the only option of real estate. You're not going to have the luxury of choice. Approximately half of those surveyed stated that their first home will most likely be a higher density housing type. And according to Treb's chief market analyst, Jason Mercer, here's what he said. The condo and townhouse segments with lower price points on average will remain popular as population growth picks up over the next 2 years. There's a lot of hope, a lot of excitement in the condo space as it relates to equity growth and the price differential between the low rise versus the high rise condo apartments. It's significant, very significant. And we might experience quite the whiplash going into 2022. But with all of that said, you have to be careful. As a warning, there are many scammy companies coming up. We've shared some of those on our podcast in the recent past that are trying to capitalize on it, right? Tech startups. Also this idea of rental guarantees where they say we're going to guarantee rent for the first 12 months only to scoop the rebates that are available to that. Good luck to you. Just be careful, folks. Be careful. Read the bottom line. Even if you're working with a builder, it doesn't hurt to have some kind of legal review or real estate professional that's familiar with that market assist you. But every time you get into a hot market, new companies love to take advantage. Well, guess what? The vertebrae has returned from vacation. That's right. They're back. I don't know why my writer puts these ridiculous jokes. Makes me look like a fool. Moving on. We get emails from Live Rent occasionally. They keep us up to date on the rental updates ahead of everybody else and share with us key trends in the rental market because not everybody, let's face it, can own a house. What about renters? What are they in for? When we look at the months, this past month going into December, the rents have risen across the GTA. The citywide average for unfurnished one-bedroom units is $31 more expensive than in November. $31, no big deal. What's shocking to me is furnished units took a real big hit during COVID, a real hit, to the point where the prices were in line with the ones that were unfurnished. So you could literally... you would expect that if you had a TV and a couch, it would cost you a little bit more. But no, for a little while there, it didn't. Well, once again, we're starting to see this change, this increase in demand for whether it's short-term rentals or furnished units that are up 26.19%, a huge increase compared to the unfurnished one-bedroom units that are up 14%. So we're starting to see this break happening again, whether that has to do with travel or demand, whether it has to do with people that are just saying, hey, why not get more money, more bang for my buck? Well, that's exactly what's happening, and these furnished units seem to be doing okay again. And when it comes to the most affordable neighborhood in the GTA for renters, that city is called Markham, Ontario. So my prediction as we look at these, and we've been tracking rents for a little while here, is that rents are going to continue to rise. I think they got a long way to go. Demand is rising. We got over 400,000 new immigrants expected to come to Canada, most of which will come to Ontario, most of which will come to this lovely city called Toronto. But apart from small investors, they get to live in, and I'm saying small investors in the sense of landlords. If you don't choose that, if you want the big giants, you know what you get? You got doo-doo living, doo-doo buildings. That's right. You can check out, we did a recent episode with Jordy Dent. Check that one out. Talk about the tenant's perspective. I love getting different and opposing views. A lot of the views he had were very much opposing to my own, but that's healthy. That's the conversations that we need in the city as we're coming up with different policies and understanding what's right and what is the solution to this affordability issue. But to add to what he said and to maybe start that conversation off a little bit for you here today, there's an article from Now Toronto called Vertical Legacy, the case for revitalizing the GTA's aging rental tower communities. The problem here is not only is rent becoming more affordable, the standard of living for renters is decreasing. Can we not keep up at least if we plan on committing to the rental space? They say once representing the social promise of high-rise living, legacy towers in the GTA are now more emblematic of chronic social and economic divestment. So a couple points here. They call it inadequate housing, which is defined, by the way, as housing in need of major structural repairs, such as upgrades to defective plumbing, heating, electrical wiring. In 2016, based on self-reported estimates by tenants, 11% of high-rise non-condo units, not small landlords, apartment buildings in the city of Toronto, 11% considered themselves to be inadequate housing. 9% of high-rise non-condo units in Peel region and 6% in York. These were all the ones considered inadequate. Together, it affected 30,800 rental units, 26,700 in the city of Toronto, 3,700 in Peel, and 400 in York region. In the city of Toronto, almost a quarter, 23% of high-rise non-condo rental households, they consider overcrowded. This has to do with space, which is tragic because typically, whether it has to do with protecting your rental, you're not so worried about this rent eviction process. They don't happen so frequently with them. They just end up doing major repairs and they boost your rent more. But that's okay. You don't get rent evicted, right? Win. But it's tragic because these units are typically cheaper, historically cheaper. Despite their for-profit mandate, legacy towers provide lower than average market rents, making them a highly sought-after commodity for low to moderate income renter households. Toronto high-rise tenants pay on average just under $150 or 14% less for their monthly rent than other renters in the primary rental market. Why it's a good option for people that are moving to our country and want to live. But the thing here is they also are experiencing massive, massive demand. So renting, generally, one of the points that I get at here is generally for low income. This debate between should I rent or own, not to say that this is the reason for this, but it's definitely a reflection of those with wealth tend to own. Those that rent tend to be lower income. Listen to this stat. Between 1980 and 2015, the real average wage of high-rise renters increased by a mere 5.1% compared to 40.6% growth for homeowners over the same period. So not to say that the house is what created the wealth, though it did that too. It's what we see here is that those who own a home generally, even when it comes to their income, we see their real average wages increase dramatically faster than those who are renting. And the result, we have stagnant purchasing power coupled with rising rents, which means more tower residents are living in unaffordable housing. Housing is considered unaffordable when it's equal or above the 30% threshold. And they say when it goes past the 50% threshold, that you start cutting essential things like groceries, medical costs, transportation. I can't get my braces on my kid. I have to afford to live in my 50% of my income is going to rent. In the city of Toronto, in 2016, 48% of high-rise tenants paid over the 30% benchmark, with half paying over the 50% benchmark, half of those. That is crazy. That's an excessive number of people when a quarter of people have to decide between whether they're going to get medical treatment, whether they're going to be able to commute, or they have to walk to work because they can't afford it, or put groceries on their table, or live. A bad scenario and a good conversation with Jordy Dent. Check that podcast out. The one before this or the one before that, can't remember, but check it out. So what's the solution? And we're going to start getting into what the government is doing because we have ourselves a real crisis, not just in ownership, but in the rental market, all of it. They say the private sector alone cannot respond to the dual challenges of affordability and the repair of legacy towers. We're dealing with trying to fix these buildings. I can't also be dealing with this. I got to make money. I'm a business. They say this is a public sector challenge that requires government, private sector as well, the philanthropic sector, and community service organizations. Ultimately, affordability is a global issue, and we need to learn from those around us. You know why Pluto didn't have a good vacation? Because he didn't plan it well. Well, we don't want to have the same problem here. Let's listen to the plan, and we're going to start off talking about the city level. Hopefully you guys are learning some stuff. I love researching this and figuring out what's going on and where there are going to be things coming in from what direction. And we need to have a true understanding of the affordability before we can deal with the solution. So hopefully there's a solution coming. I think there might be, but we need to tread carefully, and you're going to hear why. At the city level, we're talking about something called inclusionary zoning. We've been discussing that for a while, but part of that concept is that it will become, within the city of Toronto, it's been decided, mandatory to have affordable rental creation as part of development. Here's what they say. The idea of inclusionary zoning, as an update for you, is designed to help ease affordability efforts in the notoriously pricey city. An inclusionary zoning policy is a land use planning tool that requires new residential developments to include affordable housing, where some rents or the cost of ownership will be less than the increasingly unattainable marketplace allows. So in other words, when we're creating these units, we need to have a certain percentage, a certain number of them also be available to those who can afford it within that category considered affordable, and to really help that under 50 and under 30% of your rent money is going to rent. Well, now zoning bylaw amendments and draft implementation guidelines will make it mandatory. Guys, this is coming to a city near you very quickly for certain developments around protected major transit station areas, right? We're focusing on these transit hubs to include affordable rental and ownership housing units beginning in 2022. So the plan in Toronto is this. They're going to secure, inclusionary zoning will secure, they say, 5 to 10% of condominium developments over a minimum unit thresholds as affordable housing. So 5 to 10% need to be affordable, but they're going to increase this gradually until 2030, where they're hoping to have it between 8 to 22, which is a big range. And they've got all these fancy calculations on how they're going to do it and what areas get categorized for what. But the goal here is to create more affordable housing. Mayor John Tory is excited. He says, I'm pleased the city council adopted this plan, which will help the city achieve its target of approving 40,000 affordable rental units and 4,000 new affordable ownership homes across Toronto by 2030. That's the goal here. But treading carefully, let's look at the criticism, because we can't just get all excited and hot and horny about these kinds of changes, because, we all get hot and horny about policy adjustments, but we got to also look at the criticisms, the counterpoints, including not just locals, which we'll talk about in a second, but also the World Bank. We're talking global, we're talking local. The World Bank points out the success rate of inclusionary zoning has been pretty underwhelming. Here's what they say, quote, reviews of the impact of IZ policies highlight that even though regulations even though they add to the supply of affordable housing, they tend to produce small numbers of homes and at a potentially substantial cost. We're going to talk about those costs in a moment, but they say to date, IZ programs have played a relatively small role in meeting the needs for affordable housing in the United States. The United States have been doing this for quite a while. But how? How does that work? Well, don't need to look any further than local critics. They've got Randall Lyle, who's the president of the Residential Construction Council of Ontario, obviously with something to lose, involved in the construction industry, but they point to the flaws here. They argue inclusionary zoning will only slow construction of much needed homes and, guess what, hike up prices in the process. Don't you hate when that happens? They say this, and I think this is so interesting. Quote, it will likely penalize those buying market price units as the cost will be passed on to them. So I'm creating a house with very tight margins, I might add. A lot of people think there's a lot of money in building. Not so much. There's a reason they'll pull back and try and grab that extra 100,000 and kill your pre-construction. But ultimately what they're saying here is, okay, you're going to add this additional cost. We're going to lose money here on these affordable units. Well, guess what? I'm going to pass that on because I still need to cover my costs. I need to make some kind of profit, or I'm going to stop building altogether, which also poses a problem. But let's assume the best case scenario, we're going to pass those costs on, and that's going to be great for those Gen Zs, those first-time home buyers we talked about earlier in the show. And guess what? Instead of dealing with the rental issue and dealing with affordable housing and allowing people to get in the market, it's actually based on this, and I'm not going to, I'll let you guys put your chips where you want. But based on this, there is an expectation that it could very well boost the bottom dollar, the price of those homes. Are we simply pushing people because now they can't afford a house because they're paying for this guy to have a house? Are we therefore pushing people down the property ladder, away from ownership, back into rentals, creating additional demand and spiraling our conflict? And it could get messy. It could get messy, but it's also a good opportunity if you're an investor and you have real estate assets. If your game plan here is to get massive increase in equity. But here's the quote to wrap this up, what Lyle says. He says, the irony here is that qualified buyers might ultimately have to move to the list of affordable home seekers. Funny how that works. The policy is not going to materially add to the aggregate supply of housing overall. In fact, it could have a chilling effect on future projects and make some untenable, leading to fewer condos being built. Fun. Grab yours now. Grab yours now. A lot of young people are seeing condos as an opportunity. The recommendation coming from the World Bank, if this is going to work, they say in order for inclusionary zoning to produce homes, they must offset developers' potential losses or even enhance the overall profitability of a residential development. If we're dealing charity work, give them money as a charity. Don't expect the businesses to single-handedly carry the cost of this. You're going to scare some of them out. You're going to push them into single-family homes where they're going into these small markets and they're outpricing the locals there too. Good idea. So is regulation the way to go, or should we instead be reducing red tape, streamlining approval processes, and giving developers a break on development charges? You be the judge. You be the judge. Let your vote count at the next provincial election. This is getting way out of hand. We're paying the price for historically bad policy. We all love Will Smith, but what about the past? We got to look back sometime, like the time-traveled version. Was Smith. Ain't nobody excited about Was Smith, right? In a lot of ways, the city's hands, though, are tied, and I don't blame them. I mean, they've only got so many resources. Even the inclusionary zoning was by permission from the provincial government. So we got to jump, if we're going to deal with anything of material changes here, we got to jump up to the provincial level. And there's a few big moves that they're taking right now. Move number one, a speculation tax. This is coming from a Toronto councillor. Mike Cole represents Ward 8 Eglinton Lawrence. And he's calling the Ontario government to introduce a speculation tax on the sale of homes that are not principal residences to deter speculators and what he calls, quote, home flippers. So if you're buying a house and you're flipping it, you might not even be doing anything. You're going to have to pay for that. There's going to need to be a tax at the provincial level. We need to implement this ASAP. And it wouldn't, by the way, be the first time that this happened in Ontario. The Bill Davis government brought in a speculation tax in the 70s to cool the Ontario's housing real estate market. We'll talk about the success in a minute. But this could be, in many ways, the back-breaking straw for the Toronto real estate donkey. While some experts say the province needs to address sky-high prices that have outpaced incomes, they caution such a tax could have a, quote, aggressive impact. They further say the rate of the tax and how it's implemented are crucial. Others warn it could crash the market and that any measure to deter investors could have unintended consequences. This is why we talk about it. This is why it's something we need to be paying attention to. The decision to have this hasn't been made. The call to have it happen is happening later in the month. But what happens if this happens? What is the impact of that? Are we going to have people freaking out? This would be on top, by the way, of the 15% non-resident speculation tax that already affects foreign corporations, individuals who are not citizens or permanent residents in the GTHA. And the Bank of Canada recently acknowledged for the first time that a sudden influx of investors is the likely contributor to rapid increases in house prices. It's why, myself included, there's a lot of talk about, well, let's, create some kind of disincentive for multiple properties. Let's tax them. And I don't think that's an unrealistic thing. The speculator tax comes with its own unique challenges, but we need to be very careful. We need to tread slowly and carefully. We've had large investors with very successful, very high net worth properties, property portfolios come on our show. And we've seen Sahil Jaggi is a perfect example that comes to mind in the news, talking about how I'm going to capitalize. I'm an investor. Don't hate the player, hate the game, and hate the system that we're playing within. And I tend to agree that something needs to happen, but something like this we got to be careful, because listen to this. A shock happened in April of 1974. Is this what it could look like again? The Bill Davis government introduced a 50% speculation tax on non-principal residences. It was later, by the way, decreased to 20%, so they obviously overshot, and then they scrapped it all together. So somebody decided it didn't work anymore. So here is a lawyer, Bob Aaron, the man with 2 first names and a real estate law degree. I guess you just get a lawyer degree and you just choose. Anyways, moving on. That was April 9th, 1974. The worst day of my career, said Aaron, who remembers fielding endless calls the next day. They were from buyers trying to get out of purchases and from sellers wanting to make sure that deals were still going through. Quote, there were years of litigation after that. There was blood in the streets when people saw the equity in their home was just evaporating overnight, he said. Well, we'll have more details on that later this month and into January, but keep your eye on it. That is happening at the provincial level. Those calls are taking place. Move number 2, another big call also supported by AREA is real estate fraud. We got to deal with these fraudsters hiding behind number corporations. The province has 3 major parties. You know who else travels in 3s? High school girls, right? Because both high school girls and Andrea Horvath can't even right now. The NDP housing critic Jessica Bell and her friend Batila Karpoch, we actually had Jessica on our show, both of them are MPPs. They're introducing legislation to crack down on fraud in Ontario's housing market, one of many measures needed to rein in skyrocketing home prices. And I think there's a ton of validity and support for making a change like this, but how it's going to happen is going to happen at the political level, which can be slow and painstaking. The Anti-Money Laundering and Housing Act, which they're putting forward, would require corporations, trusts, and partnerships that own real estate to disclose individual owners with failure to comply, resulting in fines of up to $100,000. Which you could say, like, who cares? Who cares? Until you hear the numbers. Let's talk about that. Between 2008 to 2018, privately owned corporations in the GTA spent $28.4 billion on luxury residential homes and failed to include information on beneficial owners, according to the report by Transparency International Canada. $28.4 billion of people, we have no idea who actually bought that real estate. A whopping $25 billion in residential mortgages are filed by unregistered lenders that aren't subject to money laundering provisions. They don't even do the FinTrack forms. They're just like, how does this even happen? Well, that's the question. But the Ford government hasn't brought it in yet. Jessica Bell recently had a Twitter post, I guess that's 6 days ago. Government members voted against our Bill 43 amendments to tackle money laundering, speculation, and tax fraud in Ontario's real estate sector. Meanwhile, news today reveals home prices in GTA rose 22% over the past year. Housing affordability is not a priority for Ford Nation. And as mentioned, the Ontario Real Estate Association, the real estate boards are getting behind this because we do want to deal with fraudsters and illegal activity. I think we all do. Ford included, but how is that going to happen? It doesn't seem to be a priority right now. What is he doing? What is that man doing? A very interesting article came out from the Vancouver Sun, and I love getting views from other places. Pluto, British Columbia. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has announced he will hold a meeting this month with 29 mayors on housing affordability, recognizing out-of-control prices are pummeling his province more than others. So we know his strategy already. We know what the Ford government is hoping to do. They want to build more housing faster, but which could also weaken municipalities' ability to regulate construction, right? So we could have ourselves kind of a two-edged sword. We want to make things a lot easier, but then where's the regulation and where's the control? That's the trade-off. But not that the measure is apples to apples, but what this article did that I thought was quite fascinating is they compare an NDP-run Vancouver, Metro Vancouver, and then cities in Ontario and what's happening there with a conservative-run government. I love this. As typically a conservative myself, I could take the shot. Hopefully you guys can too. Metro Vancouver housing prices have, under the NDP, gone up 17.5% since July of 2017, while the Greater Toronto house prices under the Ontario Conservatives have catapulted 45% since 2018. In mid-sized Ontario cities like Brantford, London, and North Bay, values have soared by an astonishing 60% in 2 years. We saw that happen here in the GTA with Barrie as well. Meanwhile, they've gone up about 20% in Kelowna and Victoria. How about 50 to 60% versus 17 to 20%? Who's doing it right? What is the ultimate goal? Is it to rein in affordability? And if so, on paper, Vancouver is doing way better. So the argument in this article is, while it's complicated to determine the causes of price shifts, obviously this isn't an exact for sure the reason, a strong case can be made. The gap between Ontario and BC values is a result of policies the BC Liberals, followed by the NDP, have brought in. Interesting. So the question here for us today, and you can let me know what you think as well, is do we need more regulation or less? Because based on this, more regulation seemed to help. Who knows? With the provincial election coming soon, though, maybe now's not the time to shake things up. We already see things getting delayed. Fun, for instance, would be here. The Globe and Mail talks about how the property assessments that you would normally get was done back in 2016. Every 4 years, we're supposed to be getting these. Well, we're supposed to be receiving that kind of property assessment province-wide in Ontario. And they're not wanting to give that out now until after the election in June, which is not a bad strategic move when you consider property values are up 50%. Have fun with that, by the way. Not to say you're going to see a property tax go up 50%. But you're going to see your property tax go up. It's all based on the calculation that they use. But the decision here, the sensible decision from the government is, let's wait to do that until the election is completed. We don't want to do too many things at one time. Keep your heads up, investors. Be aware. Make sure your numbers are good, because they might not be so good following June and following that new assessment. But what is the province doing? I can simplify it into 2 words here. Task force. They are doing a task force. It's called the Housing Affordability Force, chaired by Jake Lawrence, CEO and Group Head of Global Banking and Markets at Scotiabank, will publish a report in early 2022 telling us their findings on how they're going to help Ontarians realize the dream of home ownership. That's true leadership. Make a task force. Instead of letting supply and demand do its thing. Yeah, traveling to Mount Rushmore is cool. But back in the day, its beauty was truly unprecedented. Good old days, the good old days. It was Smiths. So let's look at the federal government, what's happening at that level. The Star had an article here, and here's what it's called. Price out of the Ontario market. For first-time buyers, it's about to get worse. But we're talking specifically about what the federal government's position is on this. They say that in the most recent report on GDP, the broadest measure of how the entire economy is faring, it's clear that investment in construction and housing plunged in the third quarter. Ultimately, our goal here is to increase supply. Then why is construction plunging? Combined with we have inflation on the rise, we're going to start to see an increase in the benchmark interest rate in the middle of next year. We already see different lenders increasing their rents. That's happening. That's already happening. Enter politics, the solution. Both the good news, both the Conservatives and the Liberals have hefty policy proposals in their election platform. They're working super hard to get, they just worked super hard to get your vote. And you remember seeing that we talked about that when that was going on, but their goal was to aim to win the middle class and suburban votes by proposing ways to boost supply, but also, unfortunately, ease the way for buyers. The Liberals plan, they signaled in the last month's throne speech that at the top of their housing policy list was a $4 billion, quote, housing accelerator fund to help cities cut red tape and build more, a more flexible first-time homebuyers incentive, now we're talking demand, and a rent-to-own program, talking about demand. But the Conservatives have already signaled that they're ready to rumble on this front. The conservatives' view, what they wanted in their platform, was to increase housing supply by freeing up federal land, encouraging construction of rental units, and tying municipal funding to building homes near transit, right? And to encourage buyers, they propose softening the stress test, let's make it easier to buy, to qualify for a mortgage, among other measures to make mortgages easier to get. So here we go. Unfortunately, or fortunately, both parties are trying to deal with the supply in the long term. Unfortunately, both parties have agreed their proposals both boost demand in the near term. So let's talk about this. Is the problem supply or demand that we need to be addressing? Maybe we should slow down on pumping the demand until we can get some kind of stability on the supply side. Damn liberals. Damn libtards. It's their fault. They're in the power, right? Well, hang on a second. And I love this kind of dialogue. So talking politics. This is a great conversation starter at Christmas, by the way. Paul Vieira, here's what he says. The reason we have a housing crisis is because of the Tories. They didn't show leadership, says Canadian Liberal Minister of Housing. Liberals have been in power since November 2015, but Tories were in power from 2006 to 2015. So don't get mad at us because we've been here since 2015. Okay. John Passalis puts that to bed by saying this. Anytime the Liberals blame Harper for high home prices, remember this. Under Harper's, Toronto home prices were rising by around $25,000 per year. Still pretty high. But versus Trudeau at 80,000 plus under his leadership. If the dream, he says, of home ownership is dying, it's Justin Trudeau's government that is killing it. So hopefully conversations can happen. Hopefully things can be done. I think there is some synergy and there's some agreement and everything that's happening, but who am I to say? I mean, we only run the largest podcast for Toronto real estate. Nobody listens to us. What you guys think, leave it down in the comments below. And in the meantime, I love vacations. I love it. And I'm already kind of trying. I think the next one's going to be something a little more exciting. This will be for us, not for the kids. Freaking kids. They make it so hard to go anywhere. Like, what if I wanted to travel to Afghanistan? No, don't worry, guys. We won't be heading there anytime soon. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe, bell for notifications. We like to have some fun. If you want to send me a DM, you can do that at Watson Estates. But I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you next time. Take care and keep it real.